And good evening, everybody, and welcome to Anantha Festival of Poetry that is being organized by Samyukta Poetry. And this is a very special evening for us because we have with us in conversation Anupama Raju. And she was one of our earliest contributors when the site had begun. And we were completely floored by her marvelous poems. She is a columnist, a poet, an artist, and also a translator. And it is with great pleasure that I am inviting Anupama Raju and all those who are joining us on this platform as well as on Facebook. So I am looking forward to a cracker of a conversation, and you are welcome to pitch in with questions, queries, and requests. And so, shall we begin then, Anupama?
Absolutely.
If I may, there was something that I noted in one of your columns, actually, where you had mentioned that, I think it was in terms of what 2021, what is the message that you're taking forward for yourself? And it was about, you said gratitude, you said agility and learning. So can we begin on that note?
Sure. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you, Samyukta and Sonia, for this festival. I know these are times where all of us have kind of, become a little, what do I say, tired of virtual gatherings and zoomed out and completely experiencing fatigue. But still, I think in the absence of it, we would all suffer terrible solitude. So thank you for this initiative. It's a very interesting question you asked, and a rather unusual one. Usually I don't get asked this particular, asked about this particular element. Gratitude, agility. Yes. Now the thing is, I think we live in times where, by the way, it's always easier said than done, right? When you have a column, you have the luxury of preaching, and I usually try to be as honest as I can. I do say I am trying to practice what I am preaching here. So it is still very much a struggle for me. I think last year brought us all to a standstill, as we all know, right? It kind of questioned every little paradigm, everything that we had gotten used to, every accomplishment we thought we had accomplished. So it all seemed so trivial. And then came the time to be thankful for the little things that, help us chug along day to day. So those were the primary lessons for me. And not just as a writer, but also as a communications professional, because, you don't know, you haven't experienced the situation, and you have to take decisions. You have to hope they are the right decisions. And so you have to be flexible and agile. So these are all usually very corporate cliches that one uses in management circles. But I think those principles also help me in my art. And not, there were periods of stress, and then for all of us. So those principles my creative pursuits as well. I think they continue to, because the pandemic is still going on. We are still very much in the middle. So I suppose and I just have to play along.
Please keep your mics muted if you are not speaking. It interrupts the person who's speaking. So please.
Now, I'm done as far as that question goes. Okay, brings in a very cheerful note to the evening. So
Right.
I think
yeah. Yeah, and now from there, I would like to go on to another article of yours, which I had noticed some time ago, where you were talking about the whole question of being able to say no, which helps you, kind of gain a grounding. And that made me think about the poems that you had, I think, curated about writing the body.
That's right.
Yeah, so somewhere it all seemed extremely relevant to me that the stand that you have written about somehow translates into a deeply personal as well as a deeply social space. So perhaps we would like to know more about your poetry and your personal stance.
Sure. Um, Being assertive and saying no at the right time, I think, are very important. And it's never an easy thing to do, because we all live in a world that's defined by relationships, whether at work or whether in architecture.
Just a minute, please. Yes.
Yeah, so saying no is never an easy thing to do. Um, so in the column I had, it was about being assertive and how do we say no in the workplace, for instance. But when I was trying to explore a similar kind of stance through poetry, I had to look at it in the context of violence, gender violence, or sexual violence. And then how do we use our bodies as metaphors of protest? How do we say no? So the section you're referring to is the one that I had put together for Scroll early last year, and it was the pandemic was still starting, and it's not really in the context of the pandemic, is it? Because this particular issue has always existed. And not just gender violence. I mean, any kind of violence for that matter. So though in that section, the poems were addressing this particular issue. We had poems by Priya and Kartika Nair, Srilata. Priya and Saru, and Srilata have been part of Anantha as well. And a couple of my poems. So all these poems were trying to explore this particular theme of body as a metaphor of protest, and how we could say no there. Of course, in the workplace, it's a different story altogether, because you're speaking the prose, right? You're speaking the prose of everyday language. You're speaking the prose of management language. So you don't have the luxury of getting into metaphors and intrinsic, what do I say, the gray areas that poetry allows us.
Oh, that's very enlightening, actually. And I was looking at the transition that has come about in your poetry over a period of time. Like from the time that Nine was written all the way up till here, there has been a distinctive change in your voice, in your tonality, as well as in the kind of let's say ethos that you're advocating. So, can we have some more insight into that?
Thank you, and I hope you like the change.
Of course, that's wonderful.
Right. Well, so Nine, my first book of poems came out in 2015, and it kind of collected poems I had written over a period of time. So a lot of it also, the book had a lot of my early poems as well. So when I look at it, I'm like, some of it I feel, oh my God, it's so childish, and the preoccupations are childlike, I should say, not childish so much. In the last, ever since Nine came out, some of my preoccupations have changed. My writing style has changed. Earlier, I used to use form a lot. Even in Nine, you find forms like sestina and the triolet and and a terrible attempt at.
I'm sorry, I think there is some kind of disturbance all the time. Yeah.
Right, that's okay. It's part of the Zoom experience.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So that I think both in terms of themes, I'm not too sure. The readers are the best judges of it all. Some of the themes, I think, thematic preoccupations perhaps have not changed much, but the way I approach some of those themes has definitely changed. Um, I seem to be writing a lot of prose poems of late. Um, Also, I've been preoccupied with this whole concept of protest and the responsibility of the artist. Um, who is a poet, for instance? Am I a poet? What should I write about? What is my responsibility? Is it okay to just stay silent, or shouldn't I, speak up? And in some of my recent work, I've even tried to make fun of my own poetry. Um, More of irony and so on and so forth. So these have been some of my recent preoccupations in some of the recently published work, which have appeared over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 years.
I see. Maybe we could have a reading.
Sure, happy to. So let me begin with a poem which was published in Domus, India, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll just read. I'm a woman and I write. I'm a woman and I write. I write and I'm a woman. I write of longing, belonging, of my body, of everybody, of my home, my country, where I roam. I'm a woman and I write. My poetics are screwed up. My imagination dried up. I lack conviction and I give up easily. I lack direction and I give in easily. I seek a voice which will not be heard. I am a woman and I write. I make things up because they seem right. I am everything I am not. A devoted mother, a faithful wife. I lie exquisitely. I choose metaphors carefully. I say grand things like, I'm a woman and I write. I declare, denounce, decry, and detest. I have a point, but don't care enough to make it. What can I say? I'm a woman and I write.
And that has to do with the day-to-day deceptions that generally women have to kind of submit themselves to or kind of make peace with, isn't it?
Well, for me, it was more about kind of what do I say? I was I was making fun of my own art. You know, I was questioning it, and I was saying, hey, this is what it is. My poetics are screwed up, and I don't have any explanation. This is how it is. Take it or leave it. So I guess a
I
little
see.
bit arrogant.
Oh, come on. Again, I was going to ask you about your Chennai poems because there's this great deal of nostalgia that comes through. So, do you still feel the same way about Chennai?
I think no matter where I go, no matter how old I get, I will always miss Chennai. Chennai is my hometown. That's where I was born and raised, my education, my first job. Um, that's where I met my partner. So definitely so many milestones have happened. And it's a city I have great fondness and love for. My family is still very much there. I just got back from a visit. So while I was there, I did all the things I was missing about this city. Looking at familiar spots, walking to those familiar spots, taking in the sights and sounds as much as I can. That happens with me for many places, but especially after the pandemic started, when everything came to a standstill, when you couldn't really travel or anything, I was missing home. I was terribly homesick. I was Chennai sick. And so, yes, Chennai poems have mostly appeared in Nine. And there's a certain cliche and stereotype. Probably I wouldn't be able to write about Chennai like that now, because one changes. But there are some who like those poems, and I mean they say, oh, there's a charm about it and things like that.
That's good. And can we have one of those?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I would probably read two short poems. This is from Nine.
Okay.
And one is Mylapore, Chennai. I don't know if anybody here knows Mylapore, but it's one of the places where, I mean, I used to go there to study journalism. My journalism school was in Mylapore. So I used to go there after my college. And there's a temple I don't know, I haven't been to Mylapore now, but that particular time, there's a beautiful temple and there's a temple pond around it. There's the brouhaha of the whole, it just comes alive. And all the cliches that you've heard of and that you would probably see, they're all there actually. So yes, I'll read Mylapore, Chennai. Mylapore, Chennai. Fresh vegetables and slush bathe inviting streets. Fight with gods for space. Oiled plates, snakes charmed by tunes of wayside flutes and chattering bangles. Eager nostrils take Adai and Avial trails to Katpagam mess. Elegant silks dressed up tall glass windows. I see my wedding sari. So that's Mylapore. And I'll just read one more. And even when I just went to Chennai, I went past my school. So this is the school I went to. So there's a poem called Fatima Convent. Buffaloes graze on green memories that sprout on my way to school. Remember that shop? Bottles of sinful syrup? Fruit juice on credit? The white blouse and green skirt dry on the red terrace. With them, my school days. We went together, humming film songs, spilling smiles till we reached school. Yasmin, we rolled our socks down to show our legs and paid fines to nuns. Remember? That very much happened, by the way.
Yes, I can believe that. I can believe that. So tell me now, from this very beautiful childlike, I would say, sense of nostalgia and the kind of reflection. What is the trajectory? What is the the sort of imagination that you're employing now? Your vision.
Well, let me quote some of the popular opinions that come to me. I'm told that I have become a very dark poet. So it's not a conscious effort, but I guess I write what comes naturally to me. So like I mentioned before, there are some preoccupations with what's happening in the world now. And you cannot ignore it as much as you like, right? Unfortunately, we are living in terrible times. So I feel the urge to respond to it. Sometimes those responses, I mean, I can't think of a nice way to respond to those. No point shying away from it. So I've been preoccupied with this whole idea of protest. That has come up a few times in the last, especially in the last couple of years, more so over 2020.
And
Yeah.
yeah, please go on.
Yes, so
Uh,
protest is one, and I think there are other preoccupations like love is what I'm told again, because once you're, it's I've always believed that once you've written something and once it's been sent out into the world, then it's no longer yours. So readers have told me this, right? So I'm actually relying on them when I say these things. In my own view, I feel very strongly that I should respond, and otherwise I'm not doing my part.
so for that level of consciousness, could we have a verse that you might have written during that time?
Yes. So this is a poem that appeared in October 2020. It appeared in Scroll. When all else fails, there's nothing left to talk about. Candles are all out. Rice has stopped growing. Rivers have stopped flowing. Nations are falling. The children are dying. No one left to follow. No one left to lead. There's no time for friends. Not enough hate to kill. Forget about passion. Faith is out of fashion. This is the right time to go out and unite. This is the right time to go out and fight. When all else fails, declare a bloody war.
Excellent. I think these were part of the series of silence. I think all the candles have gone out.
That's
Yeah.
right.
So, are you exploring silence as a metaphor for protest, or is it the right opposite of it?
Well, my attempt, and I don't know how often I'm successful. My attempt is always to see how subtly I can protest. Um, so rather than kicking my, my feet,
Yes.
because sometimes those voices go unheard. But I'm not sure, because there are also poems like Conditioner, which was published earlier in the year, where I used a very different kind of technique. So in this particular poem, the one I just read, I was trying to, as you said, it is all part of a thematic structure, and the theme was silence, because there's nothing left to talk about. That is what I felt. But sometimes also find that um irony and a complete coldness and absence of emotion or sentiment is the best way to deal with injustice. So that is something that comes up in another poem. Um, should I read that now, or
Oh,
do you
yes,
want
of
me to?
course.
Right. Conditioner. She should have used a conditioner, would have made it smoother when dragged by her hair. any brand would have done may have distracted her. Conditioners can condition hair, skin, legs, breasts, vagina, but mostly screens, which don't leave a mouth held shut by a knife. If only she had used a conditioner. Would have been a softer ride when the cop listened with empathy, feeling her up. That night, she used soap with glycerin and antiseptics, hoped it would clean her up. But nothing came close to a conditioner. Next time, I will condition myself, she thought, as she brushed down her knotted hair.
This undercurrent of violence perpetrated and experienced, it's something of a motive in your poems, is it not?
Yes, so like I said, I've felt the need to speak up against what is happening, and unfortunately, violence is growing. So there is a need, and I'm constantly looking at ways of responding to it in ways that make sense to me. I think a lot of our poets in India and elsewhere in the world are doing that. So these themes, uh, they become imperatives. I mean, you can no longer think of it as a theme. It's like, okay, now today I shall write about this. No, it does. It you just kind of, it's sitting there inside you, eating you up, until you kind of put it out there. I don't say this to sound very fancy about it, but it is a preoccupation. And some days I'm successful in translating that preoccupation into words. Some days I'm not.
And another thing that I've noticed about your poetry is possibly that they are very aware of closed structures, windows, doors, frames, and light that is placed within them. In fact, in the edition of Samyukta Poetry that we carried, I had pointed that out as well. So, the walls. So the presence of these solid structures that frame people or try to contain people, there's a lot of that in your poetry.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm glad you noticed the presence of windows or doors. For me, these are all tools or media that connect me to an outside world. So perhaps it's the other way around. Maybe the world is connected to me. Maybe I'm the one who's free, and the world is tied up, and I'm able to observe them through this window or door. But these windows have always remained a preoccupation, and they kind of, it's interesting. I started observing this pattern. They seem to come up at some point or the other, and I see it as a conduit.
Hmm. Because when we read those poems, they give us this very anime kind of a feel, dark silhouettes, and then there'll be these lit blocks of windows. And my next question to you was related to this itself. So where is your narrative placed? I mean, your protagonist in your poems, what are they looking out at, or what is this gaze that they're inviting?
That's an interesting question. Well, um, the protagonist, so to speak, is always observing. You know, Obviously there is a lot of, almost, I wouldn't even say appetite. There's almost a greed, right, to see what is this person's story, right? Who is that sitting inside that particular flat? What are they thinking of? What did they have for dinner? What are they going to do tomorrow? What is that story, right? So constantly observing. And that was an experience I particularly cherished during my residencies, because you're alone, you are the master and mistress of your own time. Your room has a window, and it's up to you how you make use of that window, right? And you can draw the curtains, sit behind them, and watch the world. And thankfully, I wrote a whole bunch of poems around the window. So not only did I physically sit and write near the window, but I was able to make the window itself a character in some of these poems. So I don't know if I answered your question, but sometimes the protagonists are the people being observed. The observer is merely, is
An
merely
observer.
an observer, someone who just writes their stories. Yeah.
Yeah, because it seemed like an essential, way of establishing a connect, which may not entirely be desirable. It seemed like, the person would like to be connected across these roads and, streets, but may have this feeling that I'll regret it if I do establish connect. It might spoil the romance. That's the kind of, rather aching conundrum that is presented in it. It's very palpable, and thank you for making it happen in these words. And you do, I think except for the one on the Navarasas, you're not prone to writing very long poems, is that?
Yes, that's true. Most of the time, I seem to write short verse, but that's not a conscious choice because sometimes my poems do tend to get long, but they're not. But they're not lengthy like that. My attempt is also try and see if I'm able to capture something as briefly as possible. Um, in my early days, like when I say early, I mean let's say 15 years ago or so, I used to be really fascinated by forms like haiku and uh,
I do.
yeah, things like that, because you have to discipline your mind and try and it's a good exercise, it's a good learning exercise. But I can't imagine writing haiku now, uh, because like I said, it's more of prose poetry, and it's a natural evolution. I don't use any structures now. None of it is conscious. I think it's defined by the theme.
So now let's talk about what is it that you're doing these days, because I happened to see a video of yours where you mentioned that translation is like cooking, on some days it's like painting. That made me wonder if you have kind of gotten into translation, and to my absolute delight I found that was the case. So
Yes, so my engagement with translation started when I was a student. During my MPhil days, I wanted to understand the problems of translation, and I worked with the fiction of three novels of M.T. Vasudevan Nair, and thankfully, the translator Geeta Krishnamurthy was also available and accessible. So I was able to, understand this. Now, after that, I didn't want to I didn't want to just say goodbye to translation studies. I wanted to understand the practice of it. So that's when I slowly started practicing. And it's been a very slow journey, but I always remember what Dr. Ayappa Panikkar told me. He's one of my mentors, and he's the one who told me that never be in a hurry, take your time. Take your time to, you just write and perfect. You can publish in due course. Do not worry about that. So when I moved to Trivandrum, I had the good fortune of working with Mr. Paul Zakria. And he has been a wonderful friend and so accessible and absolutely friendly. And I've been working essentially with him. And for me, translating from the Malayalam to English is essentially a way to understand my own language, because I was, like I said, I was born and raised in Chennai, so I never studied Malayalam. My spoken Malayalam is good, and I can read it, of course, but I cannot write. If I write, I mean, they look like, these little ear pumps. They look rounded letters, but anyway. So I'm not familiar with the written script like that. So I wanted to actually practice and find out the challenges myself. And Mr. Sakriya has been, so helpful that way. He's been very collaborative, very patient, and our partnership has strengthened over the years. I've had the opportunity to translate a few stories of his, which have been published in a few journals, including Indian Literature from Sahitya Academy. Um, then there was a bilingual journal, a wonderful journal early on called Pratilipi, which was probably one of the earliest online journals which was dedicated to translation. So my first translation appeared in that one. It was called 60 Wattinde Suryan, the 660-watt sun. And these were some of his news stories which were appearing in magazines and so on, so which hadn't appeared in other anthologies. So, and then there have been a few stories like that. Some are in the process of getting published. So, yes, it is a delight. The reason I must have, compared it to cooking or anything else is, see, it's like sometimes when you need to get a dish right, you have to follow the recipe to the T. You can get creative, but sometimes that creativity can go, a little off, and you will not be doing justice to that recipe. So you have the responsibility when you are translating a story. I don't mean to trivialize it, but when you're translating a story, you're all the time aware that this is not mine. This is his story, right? This is what he wanted to say. So I have to be consistently sensitive to what he wanted to convey. The context becomes important. The nuances, the cultural nuances need to be captured. Then, of course, the age-old arguments that exist, limitations of the language and things like that. So how do you negotiate all that and still do justice, right? It's a slow process. It's a painful process. One story takes sometimes months, right? And then it's not just, you don't just translate it and it's not done. I've enjoyed the discussions that have happened after the translation. We sit together, we discuss it, and then comes the process of, revisiting it. And it's a very enjoyable process. For me, it is painstaking because, as I said, I want to do justice, but I take the trouble to understand, and it takes time for me, but thankfully he's patient.
Oh, that's great. So perhaps we could hear a bit of the translation if you have it available. I
Sure.
think there's a story called Bar.
Yes, so I'm going to read from this wonderful anthology that just came out a couple of months ago. It's available in all bookstores now. This is the anthology is out of print, and the out of print. Out of print is an online journal dedicated to short fiction, essays, and translations. And they celebrated their 10th anniversary, and to commemorate that, they brought out an anthology of some work that has appeared across the 10-year period. And
It's
they
quite massive.
Yeah, and they included this story which I had done for them, and that is called The Bar by Paul Sakria. So I'll just read a small section, and it is typical Sakria, right? It's got some interesting preoccupations. Hopefully you all will get a sense of it. Obviously, we don't have enough time for the whole story, but maybe you all will go back.
I had read his incandescent novel, History of Compassion.
Yes.
It was very interesting. So, after you finish reading, I have a question. So,
Sure. Okay. The Bar. This establishment is no longer open. The notice outside Mathura Bar proclaimed to its regular patrons one morning. Written in green ink on the thick cardboard of a liquor carton, it had been nailed to the door. Those who had been at the bar till closing time the previous night stared in astonishment. One of the men leaned over and touched it to be doubly sure. Everyone saw his hands quiver. He turned and said in a thickened voice, "No way. This must be a joke." Nobody responded. There was something about the writing on the notice and the way it was displayed that suggested it was not a joke. Moreover, The bar had remained closed past its opening time. The man who had touched the notice slowly moved away and stood behind the others. His mustache, dyed black, was surrounded by the grey stubble on his cheeks and chin. His shaking hands reached for a cigarette and lit it. Behind the bar was a little window that was used to serve liquor to regulars who came late at night or in the wee hours of morning. One of the men had come that morning and knocked on it for a long time. He now stared blankly at the cigarette smoker. Then he roused himself and began searching for cigarettes and matches in his pocket. He couldn't find any. Damn it, he muttered to himself. Maybe they've gone on strike, one of the men said. The others looked at him with pity. He immediately corrected himself. But there's neither a flag nor a poster. Silence again. All of a sudden, someone moved forward and climbed onto the bar's veranda. His eyes were on a switch on the wall. In what seemed like a gesture of defiance, he put his finger on the switch. Instantly, the colors of the huge neon hoarding atop the bar came to life with a hum. The letters emerged. The assembly stirred and stared at the hoarding. The man who had switched it on appeared jolted and switched it off. He stepped down, smiling awkwardly. The night watchman, whose duty it was to switch off the hoarding at dawn, stood staring at the man as if he was a ghost. A regular who had been at the bar until closing time the night before tried to remember if there had been any signs that foretold such a closure. He felt that the three partners who owned the bar, the four waiters and the sweepers, a man and a woman, had betrayed nothing, given no indication that it was the bar's last night. He couldn't decide if he was right or wrong about that.
Are you stopping?
Yes. In the interest of time, I wouldn't want to bore the listeners.
Oh, no, it's not at all boring actually. And Anupama, if you can remember while translating this, what was the biggest stumbling block? At least, till the portion that we've heard, where did you have to pause the hardest?
So the little, what do I say? The reactions, the certain words, the utter agony of some of these people who don't have access to the bar, right? So there were these interesting humorous touches, typical Sakriya style, right? The irony and the sarcasm. How do we capture that? So for me, that was one of the challenges, and that remains a challenge all the time. And without it coming across, it shouldn't come across bland, right? And because it wouldn't do justice to his story at all. And he does it with such ease. So then it should come across naturally. So that's always been I think a challenge.
I was thinking of these expressions like thickened voice that you used. And I was wondering, what could it have been in Malayalam? See, this is the problem when we read a translated work and you know the original language, you keep wondering, what must this have been? So,
yeah, the thing is now, because that is the thing. So it's a collaboration. It's like as if he and I have made this dish together. I made it and he tasted it, and then he said, hey, you know what, you need to add a bit of salt. So it's like that. So it is a collaborative effort. I cannot do it in isolation. And sometimes I marvel at translators who do this in isolation, who don't have access to the writers, for instance. You're doing it, and then it becomes a very lonely exercise, and it's such a huge responsibility. I'm lucky.
Maybe you could shed some light on why Paul Zachariah decided to write a novel in English finally.
Oh my God. Okay, I can give him a call and maybe ask him to join.
No, because that would be lovely actually, come on. Because when I read the novel, first thing that came to mind was, well, why didn't he write earlier? And another thing that I thought about was then, possibly he could have been translating his own works. So
Hmm.
those were the things. So I thought maybe you would know as to why he decided to. And it is a mammoth novel. It's not like it's a slim book or anything of that. So it's a mammoth novel, and not a dull moment. So these, minute tremors of amusement and irony that you talk about, yeah, they are present there. In his use of Mark Tommy and so on. So.
So what I can do is I can pass on these questions to him because I'm certainly not authorized to talk on his behalf. So it would be very unfair because it's for him to answer it.
Apart from translation, what else are you
Well,
working on?
well, I've always enjoyed collaborating with others. This whole idea of engaging with another art form or with another writer has always interested me because there are so many, there's so much you can learn and so many realms that you can discover which you never thought existed in the first place. So some years ago, the collaboration I did with a French photographer, for instance, we worked on two projects. um, we had a great chemistry because not all collaborations go well because you need to have a certain mutual chemistry and respect. But thankfully for us, it worked out well. So now I'm trying to do something similar where, with the help of, but it's still too early to talk about it. But I'm trying to work with multiple artists using the same, using one particular strain of thought. Let's see, it will probably lead to something.
Oh, I see. One particular strain of thought and different media of expression, is it?
No, the same media, but with different people.
Oh, that would yield very interesting results. I hope that really works out. And how are you contributing to it in verse or?
Yes, we are looking at verse, so that is my idea.
Now, you have been to different parts of the world on various initiatives, is it not? The Two Cities initiative and so on. So perhaps you could let us know about how that, let's say, worked upon your creative uh, abilities.
Well, travel has always helped. I think all writers would agree that travel definitely influences positively. And it does not even have to be to faraway places. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I'm in India. It doesn't have to be to another country. It can even be to, like for me, for instance, just going to Chennai or I live in Trivandrum. I could go to, I don't know, maybe Changanasheri or a small town like that. You never know from where a spark could come. My work, that is my day job, has taken me to different places across the world. My creative work has also taken me to a couple of places, but there is still so much to see. So much to see. Um, and these places, these cities or towns, they come back to me in some way or the other. And I know that over the next few years, they will all feature as characters, or they will have a place in what I write. So this idea of a city is very important to me. The idea of a place is very important. So that is something I tried to explore in various ways. Could be
So
memory, nostalgia, longing.
this is a very, film kind of a question, but uh, who would you like to be known as at the end of the day? Anupama Raju, the poet, the translator, or the artist? How is it?
I don't know really. I think it would be unfair to call. I mean, to kind of to say that I'm a translator like that because that's a very small part of what I do. Because I'd still like to do more, and I know I have a long way to go there. And I always say I write poetry. I always hesitate to say I'm a poet because that is something that I think others have to say. The readers have to recognize you as a poet. And if they acknowledge me and recognize me as a poet, then maybe what I'm writing is poetry. So, yeah.
That reminds me, I've read some of your reviews of the books of poems and so on. And I just wanted to know, what is that process of critiquing that you apply? I mean, what is the well that you draw from?
So I haven't critiqued in a while now. That was maybe a couple of years ago. But there was a period when it was happening a lot. Let's say I think the period between 2010 to 2015. Around the time, I was doing a lot of reviewing for the Hindu Literary Review. The good fortune that I had was I got to critique some of the best books that were coming out at that time, and books by poets like Arundhati and Ranjit and Jerry and uh, so many of them. Right at that time, the Hindu would send these books to me, and it was a great way to get to know what was being written in India in the contemporary poetic idiom and what was happening. So it was a great journey. But I believe that the whole genre of critiquing and reviewing is an area that hasn't developed as much as it should. Um, and I would really like to. Sometimes I rely on T.S. Eliot's essay, on what a critic should do, right? And if I were to apply those standards, I'm sure I have failed, right? So it's always, if I were to review now, years later, let's say now, I would definitely try to apply some of those principles, because those are timeless principles. And somebody can come and ask me, T.S. Eliot, haven't you outgrown that? No, I haven't. I'm an ardent follower of Eliot, and I wouldn't even use the word fan. I mean, he influences me in more ways than one. So some of those essays, even what Dr. Panikkar has said, some of those, the literary criticism, poetic criticism, I think is a serious art. And if I were to do it now, I will do it very carefully.
And has this process of reviewing, critiquing helped you in your writings as well? When you think, oh no, I shouldn't make the same mistake, or maybe that's a good idea?
Well, so when my book was coming out, I still remember I got a lot of advice. Some of the well-known writers and big names those days, I mean, even now, they told me, look, do not be discouraged by reviews. You will get a mixed bag. You can never keep everybody happy. Do not get discouraged. So I'm not sure about it, because you cannot keep the review in mind when you write a poem. I think you have to do justice to what you're writing, and you have to be satisfied. And how it would be received by a reviewer cannot be what informs your writing. That's what I believe. Because then you're going the wrong way. Because who all will you please, right? So yeah, I don't think I would let that worry me too much.
No, I'm talking about when, whatever you did as a reviewer, does it come back and inform you as a poet?
Well, I'm always thinking of I'm thinking of ways to approach themes in a new way, right? So not to be repetitive, or not to sound stale, things that a reader would look for, right? So, for instance, if somebody says, "Hey, but didn't you already say this in another poem which came out like 3 years ago?" And then I know I failed. So I think, so in that sense, yes, the looking for newness, because that is something that a critic usually appreciates.
So I guess this is turning out to be a phenomenally full time that you are having, writing and of course a bit of translation on the side, a dash, I must say, and managing a corporate job in these times. And so, what do you do to unwind?
Oh, okay. So I get very little time to unwind, and it's usually very, very stressed. I mean, I'm usually very stressed. But I also lack, I mean, I can be more disciplined. I push myself because I have these goals, I have these long to-do lists. But otherwise, I like to listen. I like to listen to readings. When I say readings, I mean even poetry readings of which are available online, right? Which I can listen to at my own pace. Uh, let's say T.S. Eliot read by Anthony Hopkins, or you know, uh, or a Sylvia Plath poem read by another actress. So it's a lot of joy listening to their voices. And like just before this session, for instance, I was listening to Michael Caine, I think, who was reading Yeats. It was a brilliant one. So that is one thing I like to do. I listen to music. I come from a family of musicians, so I listen to music. I sing. These are all things that help me relax. I watch. Sorry.
Yeah, when you mentioned Sylvia Plath is when I remembered, she occasionally drops into your books, doesn't she? I think I've seen, at least I've seen a couple of references to Plath.
Yes, especially in my early work. I mean, like she did, I think, my entire generation, or perhaps she continues to. Right? As a teenager, I discovered her work, and then she just remained. I mean, she's still inside me. I don't think that her presence would ever go away. So in my first book, yes, it was a little more apparent. I'm not sure the ones that I'm working on currently, or my next book, for instance, if that presence would be as strong as the first, but there would always be an undercurrent.
I see. If there are any questions, you are free to raise your hand or post your questions in the chat box. And meanwhile, Anupama, could we have a poem from you? We would like to close off with that. I mean, I generally think it's beautiful when we can fade off to the sound of poetry being read.
Sure, thank you. I wouldn't want to end it with a very, but I can't help it. I mean, I can't look for a poem that ends on a positive note.
No, we're not looking for positive. We're just looking for the end note. That's it.
Okay, so here you go. Our white noise. I wait for you a long time. At last, you call. You say nothing. You speak of no one. We hear each other breathe, heavy as nightfall. If no news is good news, if in silence we must love, I choose the bad over good. I choose not to love.
Thank you very, very much. And I'm very happy that we have had you over here at Anantha, because not only are you one of our earliest friends, you are a marvelous poet and you have a very distinctive voice. A voice that I think has come face to face with some hard realities of life. And, there is this beautiful way of enunciating these things. There's always a certain niche into which we can store your words and recall them. And for me, you will always be the poet who made me think of a very dark night and a block of buildings in which there was just one lit window.
Thank you so much. I mean, I still remember the essay you wrote, introducing my work in Samyukta last year. And it was, I often comment on how beautifully articulated it was, right? So thank you so much. You're very generous. Thank you for having me. And good luck and congratulations on your first anniversary. Wishing you many, many more years of success. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll see you again on these pages.
Sure. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.